Good evening from Westminster, where the Prime Minister has told Conservative MPs that she will leave Downing Street if they finally back her Brexit agreement. Her statement prompted Boris Johnson and others who've been extremely critical of the deal to say they will now come on board. The Prime Minister's deal could be brought back to the Commons by the end of this week. But tonight, Mrs May's parliamentary partners, the Democratic Unionists of Northern Ireland, said that they still could not support the deal. And during the evening, the House of Commons has been exploring its own preferred options on Brexit, but has failed to find a majority on any of them. First tonight, our political editor, Laura Kuensberg, reports on Mrs May's offer.
5 o'clock. Hardly a Tory MP to be seen on the green benches, waiting for their leader, not knowing if she was ready to say she'd leave the black door for a final time. Hundreds of her MPs crammed into a room upstairs.
It was hot and steamy in there. There was quite a lot of emotion.
There was no whooping and hollering. No one takes any great pleasure in what's happened.
She made a really sad, a highly charged, emotional speech.
So packed, cabinet ministers couldn't even get inside.
I just managed to squeeze into a very crowded committee room and get in and saw her make an announcement. It was actually a very moving statement, and she was, very clearly making the case that, look, if this is what it takes to get the deal over the line, which she believes, rightly in my view, that is in the national interest, then I will go once Brexit is done.
It's a sacrifice Number 10 hopes that has a purpose: to reverse the fierce Brexiteer opposition to the compromise Theresa May worked out with the European Union, so they can have another vote, another try to get it through in the next 48 hours.
We can guarantee delivering on Brexit if this week he and others in this House support the deal.
The Prime Minister is failing to deliver Brexit because she can't build a consensus, is unable to compromise and unable to reunite the country. She is unable to resolve the central issues facing Britain today, and she is frankly unable to govern.
Forget Prime Minister's questions, though.
Patience is amazing.
The question tonight is how many Tory opponents of the deal can Theresa May's promise shift?
Do you wish you'd changed your mind sooner, Mr Eastmark? No?
Some big-name Brexiteers were already on the move.
I preferred leaving without a deal, but once that had gone, as I say, I was willing to back Mrs May's deal, and she has now said that once the deal has gone through, if it does go through, then she will stand down, which I think shows her inner nobility.
I am very worried that we might lose Brexit. I have campaigned for Brexit, and I think the alternatives are looking increasingly unattractive. I am encouraged that she has accepted that we should have a new leader for that second stage when it comes. So yes, I think I will now vote for the agreement.
But there's a hard core, enough perhaps to block her still.
She is not, I think we universally agree, the best Prime Minister we've had and not the right person for stage 2. The reason I'm not happy is that the deal, even part 1, which she's absolutely adamant that gets signed before she goes, takes us back into Europe, not out of Europe.
What price for DUP support?
And it's almost impossible to imagine this deal getting over the line without the Prime Minister's allies she invited into Number 10 back in the summer of 2017. The Northern Irish Unionists are meant to keep the government afloat. Not budging, not this time.
The backstop in that withdrawal agreement makes it impossible for us to sign up to the withdrawal agreement. And you know what? I regret that, because we wanted to get a deal that worked for the whole of the United Kingdom, a deal that worked for Northern Ireland. But now we're in a situation where we cannot sign up to the withdrawal agreement, and it's all because the Prime Minister decided to go for that backstop.
The Prime Minister told her MPs tonight, just up there, she's ready to pay the highest price, to give up office early in a grand bargain for support to pass her Brexit deal. But without support from her Northern Irish allies, it may prove to be another failure. The dilemma may be answered not by Theresa May, but by Parliament itself. Parliament's warming up to make the decisions, tonight voting itself on an alphabet of different versions of Brexit, whether for a closer relationship with the EU than the Prime Minister plans, or even to leave without a deal. But even having said she'd quit, the Prime Minister walked in to hear no to option after option.
So the noes have it.
No majority for anything at all. Whether it is, in the end, the Prime Minister's deal or a variation cooked up by MPs, Brexit has steeped bitterness in yet another generation of Conservative MPs.
I think it's very strange for people who have the most heartfelt objections to this deal on all areas of principle, but someone says they'll fall on their sword and, oh, that's okay then.
I think it might be about the future leadership of your party?
Imagine.
Well, I tell you what, it might be for some of them, but those people who've played the games they've been playing won't be getting my support, and I'll be doing everything I can to make sure that those who have put their leadership ambitions ahead of the interests of the country are the people who do least well when any ballot comes.
The Prime Minister may hope our bargain could bring new order, but we can't know that yet. What's certain is Theresa May has become another Tory leader whose time in office was pulled apart by anguish over Europe.
Well, lots of significant developments to talk about today. We'll talk to our Europe editor, Katja Adler, in Brussels in a moment. But first, let's have more from Laura, who's with me at Westminster. Let's talk about the Prime Minister's gesture, offer, whatever you want to call it. Is that going to do the trick in terms of her deal?
Not as things stand, Hugh, particularly because the DUP, her Northern Irish allies, who she signed up with all those months ago in the wake of the general election, are not yet ready to come on board. They've been crystal clear about that. Now, never say never. It's not impossible that in the next 48 hours or in the coming weeks or even in the coming months, in the end, they might come around to a version of Theresa May's deal. But as things stand, it seems that this big gesture, the biggest weapon in any Prime Minister's armoury, seems to have fired a dud. That said, things have been so fluid here tonight, so fluid today, and so fluid really for a number of days. I wouldn't rule out anything happening that we at the moment can't predict. And in the last half hour, Parliament has showed itself still unable to agree on any better option. It's not surprising that there wasn't a majority for anything tonight. But the message that might send to some of people who are thinking about backing the Prime Minister but are reluctant to do so is, well, perhaps that might be the only thing that they would be able to get on board with. But, you know, if I were number 10 and I've been thinking this could be a genius last roll of the dice, so far it's a gamble that is not certain to pay off at all.
We'll talk about the parliamentary votes just in a short while, Laura. Thanks very much. I want to go to Brussels and bring in Katja. Katja, what's the perspective there in Brussels on not just on Mrs May's gesture or offer, but also on the parliamentary votes that have just been announced in the past hour or so?
Well, look, Hugh, I think like in the UK, the EU finds itself in a kind of agonising holding pattern now, waiting for something definitive to happen in Westminster. All of this waiting, the uncertainty affecting European businesses and European citizens. The EU finds all of this really frustrating. And what I found was there was a real contrast in moods tonight between the EU and the UK. You know, in Westminster, there was a certain buzz, a dynamism, MPs trying to do their bit to affect the direction of Brexit, whereas here in Brussels, throughout the evening, the mood has been really dark. EU leaders still look at the divisions in Parliament and in government, and they fear the creeping inevitability of a no-deal Brexit. Now, of course, they'd be thrilled if that wasn't the case, but it would also be wrong to listen to the European Council President Donald Tusk earlier today. He spoke in support of those in the UK who want to cancel Brexit or to have another vote, and to say that EU leaders still really are hoping for the UK to change its mind. The fact is that it's nearly been 3 years now since the EU referendum. The EU has got used to the idea of Brexit. EU leaders are convinced that Brexit is going to be very damaging for the UK, at least in the short to medium term. So their focus now is not on the UK, it's on stopping that presumed damage from spreading. The word often used here is infecting the rest of the European Union.
Katja, many thanks again. Katja Adler there for us in Brussels, and we'll be joined again by Laura in a short while. Well, as Laura was saying, Mrs May clearly hoping that her promise to leave office before the next stage of the Brexit negotiations will be enough to tempt a sufficient number of MPs to back her withdrawal agreement. But what is the detail of that plan, which has already been decisively rejected by MPs on 2 occasions, and how certain is it indeed that she will get that necessary support? This report from our Deputy Political Editor, John Pienaar, does contain some flashing images.
Hacking down leaders over Europe has become a habit for the Conservatives, but that's no consolation to Theresa May. Her remaining wish, to be the PM who delivers Brexit, and there's no guarantee of even that.
The ayes to the right, 202. The noes to the left, 432.
Twice now, Mrs May's deal has been defeated, and by crushing margins. Could she succeed at the third time of asking? Not easy. Not even she claims to be an enthusiast for what became the product of many compromises. For Mrs May, it's still a hard sell. She claims ending free movement eventually as a big gain and the prospect of future trade deals. But Britain's divorce settlement is sitting at £39 billion, though with no guarantees on the detail of the future relationship. There'd be a Brexit transition till the end of 2020 and longer if both sides agree. But if no trade deals in place in time, Britain would stay within EU customs rules and Northern Ireland closer still to avoid stops and checks on the Irish border. Brexiteers still hate the plan, fear being trapped under EU rules indefinitely, claim that's what Brussels really wants. Big-name Brexiteers Mrs May hosted at Chequers at the weekend came aboard tonight for fear of losing Brexit altogether. Boris Johnson, whose leadership ambitions are no secret, and Brexiteer standard-bearer Jacob Rees-Mogg, who's saying if the Democratic Unionists soften their position, he will too. Others may follow.
With the Prime Minister saying what she said, the majority in that room see this now as the best way to get us out and to be able to deal with it in the future. People broadly not happy with the corner that we've been backed into.
But enough. The DUP so far seem to be holding firm. The government needs to win over some Labour MPs, and they haven't persuaded many, nor enough Tory Brexiteers. And there's another potential obstacle. The Speaker, John Bercow, won't even let Mrs May make a third attempt to win a vote if he's not satisfied something new's on offer.
In order that there should be no misunderstanding, I wish to make clear that I do expect the government to meet the test of change.
Mrs May's been on borrowed time for months. Tonight she promised to settle up and go, to allow someone else to try to shape Britain's post-Brexit future, if only she can deliver Brexit, hand on a political legacy. She may have to leave without even that. John Pienaar, BBC News.
So, with the current voting process in the House of Commons on that new Brexit approach, if they can find it, what are the likely timings? There's now the possibility that the Prime Minister could try to hold a third vote on her controversial deal, probably by this Friday. That's the plan anyway. If she fails, Parliament could come back on Monday to debate other options, though tonight, let's just say this again, no single option drew majority support in the House of Commons. And if the Prime Minister can't get the deal through, the UK will have to propose a way forward by the 12th of April for EU leaders to consider. If the deal does get support, Britain would then leave the European Union on May the 22nd. And that then could lead, after Mrs May's statement today, to a Conservative leadership contest, probably in late May, with the possibility of the UK having a new Prime Minister by the early summer. So with all of that to think about, Laura's with me once again. Let's deal with the votes tonight. Laura, were you expecting any of these options to get majority support at this point?
No, because what we've seen is in the last few weeks, different rival tribes of MPs try to build alliances, try to build collaboration, often cross parties, to try to come up with an idea. But they've really almost been at first base. They've been at the stage of saying, OK, what might plan B essentially be if the Prime Minister's deal failed? So it's not surprising that they couldn't come to any really strong conclusion, and it's not surprising that anything got a majority, but it's not meaningless. And there are two particular plans that did almost make it, or weren't a million miles off. One for a customs union, which had some government ministers voting for it, a closer trading relationship with the European Union than the Prime Minister has been arguing for, and she's always ruled that out. But also the idea of another referendum, whatever happens. So one of the plans put forward was to say, whatever this place decides in the end, whatever number 10 puts forward in the end, you and me and all of our viewers should have another say. That didn't make it over the line, but like the customs union option, it wasn't far off. Both of those plans, though, are politically, maybe not impossible, but extremely tricky for this government to put through, because it's a complete contradiction from what was in their party manifesto.
And given what's happened today, given Mrs May's statement to MPs, How likely is it, do you think, that by the summer there'll be a new Prime Minister, a new Conservative leader?
I think it's quite likely. I mean, Theresa May said she'll go if MPs back her deal. The question of what happens if they don't, well, there's a sketchier answer from that on number 10. If we end up with a longer delay with the European Union, if we end up with some kind of convoluted process that's led by Parliament, nothing is impossible. It is, of course, quite likely, even if her plan goes pop, she'll try to stay on. But for any Prime Minister to say to their party, to more than 300 MPs in a hot, cramped room in there, I'll quit, you can't take that back.
Laura, thanks very much again. Laura Ginsburg there, our political editor with the latest thinking here. Well, here at Westminster, let's have more then on the main story. The offer from Theresa May to stand down as Prime Minister if her Brexit deal is passed by MPs. She came to office promising to deliver an orderly Brexit, but joins a long list of Conservative Prime Ministers who've had their premierships dominated and in some cases ended by party divisions on Europe, as our correspondent James Landale tells us now.
There was a time when the Conservatives were pro-European. Ted Heath took Britain into the European community. And at first, even she was keen. But later, Margaret Thatcher feared the institutions in Brussels were becoming increasingly dominant and started to resist their demands.
He wanted the European Parliament to be the democratic body of the community. He wanted the Commission to be the executive, and he wanted the Council of Ministers to be the Senate. No, no, no.
In the end, her opposition to monetary union prompted a challenge by pro-European ministers, and she was out, to the lasting fury of Eurosceptic Tories. They turned their anger on her successor, John Major, for backing the Maastricht Treaty that deepened European integration.
I will not in any way resile from the objections that I have to this treaty.
It was a resistance that led to months of parliamentary battles and wiped the smile from his face. In opposition, the Conservative Party chose increasingly Eurosceptic leaders, shedding its cautious pragmatism for a more ideological hostility to Brussels. What had once been fringe was now mainstream. When David Cameron was elected leader, he tried to end his party's obsession with Europe. But fearing the rise of UKIP, even he succumbed.
It will be an in-out referendum.
He hoped a vote to stay in would lance the boil, but instead the country voted to leave, and he too was out.
The European question has eaten yet another British Prime Minister. It triggered Mrs Thatcher's fall in November 1990. John Major never recovered his premiership, although he was there for years after Black Wednesday in September 1992. And it ate David Cameron in one gulp in a few hours after the referendum result.
Theresa May entered Downing Street in 2016 determined to deliver Brexit and other domestic reforms. But in the end, her premiership too has been consumed by Europe, may well be ended by it. James Landale, BBC News.
James there with the long and turbulent story of the Conservative Party and its links with Europe. That's it from Westminster tonight on another rather eventful day. Theresa May has told Conservative MPs she will step down before the next phase of Brexit if they back her withdrawal deal, which of course has already been heavily rejected twice. Some of her critics have tonight switched ahead of a possible third vote later this week. The protesters and demonstrators will be back for that, I'm sure. Lots of people still resisting Mrs May's entreaties as I speak, including the Democratic Unionist Party of Northern Ireland, already saying they're not backing the deal. So lots of questions still remaining, to say the least.